system unfolding. Military science fiction podcast. Untold stories every Wednesday. Military science fiction podcast. Discussion, interviews, reviews, and rants. Military science fiction podcast.
Well, hey everybody, welcome to the show. Today, yep, you get just the benefit of me and Rick, because
And Buddy,
I know,
actually,
and Buddy in the background.
Buddy's back there.
Jeff and Josh are busy being dads, so we got to give them that. Um, Today we're talking about logistics, and I think for anybody who has studied military history, we don't need to belabor the fact that logistics are important and win wars, but a lot of a lot of that gets left out of stories quite often in, military science fiction and thinking about the whole world when you're
Just,
thinking about a story.
just to bring up something that's belabored a lot in military history, um, you get a lot of people who push back on the idea that the U.S. won World War II by saying that Russia won World War II because they sacrificed all these millions of soldiers fighting the Nazis. Uh, but they don't address the fact that Russia would not have been able to do that if we hadn't supplied them with tanks and trucks and munitions and all the stuff that they used to fight the Nazis, because they sure weren't producing it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think one of my favorite stories is from the Battle of the Bulge. I can't remember what German general it was that came into it. Unfortunately, we were withdrawing in certain parts of that, and they came into a U.S. camp and found that there was like a whole turkey cooking in an oven.
Hmm.
And he realized at that point that they couldn't win. Like any country that could move a Thanksgiving dinner across across the world and cook it in the field, they were not going to prevail against that. But and that was one of the largest lessons out of World War II. And then as you move into the way that we conduct modern warfare, it's, I don't like to call it a business, but we, in a way, do it. It's almost like watching, a really finely tuned machine work when you see, like, especially watch the Navy for me, like, the Army, there are certain aspects of the Army that, the S4, the G4 is going to make that stuff work. But when you watch something like watch the Navy do something on a ship and the way that they are just pieces of a machine making that happen to get that aircraft off, it's kind of mind-boggling. And you don't realize all the pieces that go into making that happen.
And throughout history too, you look at the nations, the empires that have won wars, that have been successful, that have conquered. It's not the bravest.
Hmm.
I mean, when the Romans fought the Celts in Gaul back in, the turn of the BCE to CE, if you're modernist, or BC to AD, for a traditionalist, uh, the Celts were insanely brave. They would throw themselves into the enemy's swords naked and covered in blue tattoos, but they lost badly for two reasons. One, they had no concept of military discipline. They fought as tribes and individuals, whereas the Romans were disciplined and fought as a unit. And two, the Romans brought their logistics trains with them. And when Celts were fighting Celts, you could always count on one side to have to stop fighting at some point because they didn't have any food left.
Right.
But the Romans brought their food with them. They were very efficient in how they handled their logistics trains and how to get food for their people and how they built fortifications. They did things in a business-like manner. And although it doesn't appeal as much to the romantic in us, that the honorable, brave warriors aren't the ones who are going to win, but in real life, it's the ones who approach war like a business that win it.
In a systematic kind of almost engineering sort of way. I'm
Yeah.
wearing my engineer's cap for my brother
Huh.
who's Corps of Engineers, but it is something that gets very much forgotten. And we've talked about world building quite a bit, but I think that's something you have to think about. And we've talked about how weapon systems direct strategy and how that's going to direct the kind of conflict that you have, but also thinking about how that resupply works, how that transportation works, how you're going to get things from point A to point B, and how that could create opportunities for an enemy, that could create opportunities for your protagonists to attack an enemy supply line. Um, you know, those are all things that I think deepen and make a story more interesting when you can think about that. And if you're okay, we're going to have portals, or we're going to have faster than light, or we're going to have this kind of kinetic weapon or energy weapon. Well, how are you going to power it? How are you going to get the power there? How are you going to store it? And all those things take logistics, right? So that's all stuff that I think provides a lot of, flavor to the story that at least makes it more interesting for me. I mean, Rick, you said that you've definitely kind of peppered these things through some of your stories. Like, do you have some favorites that
Well,
come to mind?
I don't really make them a center of the story, not because they wouldn't be a center of war, but because that's not really what people want to read about.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's in the background. In all like the Drop Trooper series and a couple others, um, everybody uses what's called industrial fabricators. And I'm sure people who are Star Trek fans remember the Star Trek what do you call them? The
Replicator.
replicators.
Yeah.
Well, this is like that except not magic.
Hmm.
Uh, Basically, it's a 3D printing technology on a grand scale, and instead of storing spare parts for your ships or for spare parts for your guns or spare magazines, you store um, canisters of powdered whatever metal
Hmm.
or polymer or whatever you need to use, and you have these industrial fabricators, and you give them the raw materials, and they make what you need to order. Um, so that's how the logistics works in uh, in those universes. And the the upside of that is, well, two things. One, you can also make parts to repair the fabricators if you need to. And two, if you're somewhere far away from resupply, you don't need to wait for a shipment of spare parts for your engine. You just need to go to some asteroid or moon and use like processing, machinery to get more raw materials. So if you want to take it to like a naval analogy, rather than being the age of steam, where if something breaks, you have to wait for somebody to bring you a spare part from England. You're in the age of sail, where if your hull has a hole in it, you pull off to the nearest place with trees, cut
Right.
down a tree, process it, and slap a patch on your hull. So you can do that to some extent with this kind of technology. You can go somewhere if you're in a system and you have a catastrophic failure. You can send your tenders to an asteroid belt, melt down some ore, process it through a machine, and you don't have. It's not like you don't need a huge amount like you're providing for a whole civilization. Just a small amount that you can put in your fabricators and make your spare parts.
I mean, it only makes sense. I can't wait for. I wish there was a kind of a better incentive, I guess, for von Neumann probes that we can just send out and then go find the asteroid, mine the materials, replicate yourself, build the thing, you know, and once that.
Well, I have a book like that too that
Hmm.
kind of looks at the downside of that, but
Yeah, what's the downside?
well, in the book you have it's the only one-off book that I've ever written. It's not part of a series. It's
Hmm.
called Seeds of Gaia, and in it, far in the past, Earth managed to unite very briefly to launch these Van Neumann probes, and in each of them was an AI,
Hmm.
a nanotech factory, and genetic material from all kinds of different species, including humans. And the plan was you send it somewhere, it gets there in, however long it gets there. It's going slower than light, and it creates like a small factory on an asteroid and starts building machinery to terraform any terraformable planets that happen to be there. And if there are no terraformable or habitable planets, then it builds more Van Neumann probes and launches them to the next system.
Hmm.
Um, then the idea was eventually you terraform the planet or you get it to where it's Earth-like, and then you start cloning your animals and plants and people. And the people are raised on like a space station by the AI and taught, that it has like a human like robot body it builds for itself. And it teaches them to be human, and then it sends them down to the planet to start a new Earth. But the downside of that happens when one of these Gaia probes finds a planet that actually has intelligent life on it, but can't bring itself not to put its children, on their
Hmm.
new home. So it wipes out that intelligent life.
Oh, nobody thought to program that into the the
Well,
fail.
they did program it in, but the thing is, you have a sentient AI, and they feel things, and they overcame the programming.
Mhm.
So that was the spoiler. The secret in that book was that. So anyway,
It's still
yeah,
out there. You can go find Seeds of Gaia right now. I don't think I guess they just
it's
hadn't
not,
gotten deep
it's
enough
only
in
99 cents.
your list, your backlist.
It's the only book I have wide also, so it's available everywhere, like Apple Books, Barnes and Noble, Kobo, anywhere you see it. It's the only 99-cent book I have too. So there you go.
All
It's
right.
a commercial failure, but I hope a artistic success. So
Oh, you just got 30 more cents because I bought it. So thanks to Amazon.
but anyway, yeah, I feel like in the future, I mean in the near future, this is going to be a lot harder to, I mean we do have 3D printing, and I think that if before we actually take steps out into the solar system, it's going to be a lot more advanced than it is now.
Right. Oh yeah.
Uh, but at some point, they're going to have fabricators that are sophisticated enough to build anything you need them to build. So,
I mean, that's why the talk of going to Mars, is what it is, I think, for reasons to get people excited about space. But the smart move is just to send probes out there to build your infrastructure before you really even think about sending humans someplace.
well, right now, I don't think that would work as well. I mean, we have the basics of it, but reliability wise, I think it would break down, especially in harsh conditions.
Hmm.
And I mean, having people there it's a kind of a psychological thing more than it is a
That's what I
practical
mean.
thing.
Yeah, I think it's a going to the moon type of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. The rovers have managed to last a whole lot longer than anybody
Oh
expected.
yeah, yeah. No, the rover, but they built the rovers for simplicity too.
Yeah.
If you have something that builds infrastructure, that's going to require a lot of moving parts.
Hmm. I I don't know. I've been bitten by the 3D printing bug, and it's a pretty simple process when it comes down to it. But I mean, there are things that can fail, but I can't. I'm really excited to see what it's going to look like. Even 30 years from now, once it gets more complicated, but it's still I feel like a pretty simple way of doing things.
If I'm alive 30 years from
If
now,
I'm
I'll be
alive from
excited
now,
about
yeah, I should be
it.
here, maybe, hopefully. Knock
I'd
on
be
wood.
88, so I'm not 100% certain on that one.
I know. Another, I guess, even thinking about that, like logistics in terms of biotech and what the fundamental building blocks of that might be. It, I think, if anything, you can't kind of have a bootstrap fallacy on your tech, and I think that's what a lot of stories don't think about, especially kind of older SF, because they just didn't have to necessarily. Like it's all rule of cool. And as things progress, like I get a lot of enjoyment out of a story where the author has obviously thought about these things and then
Mhm.
taken it to the next level. How do we,
I
if,
get kind of I get kind of teased sometimes about
yeah,
the fact that all of my military ships have the same kind of food that people eat, and that's another logistics thing is, you know, people who are rich or luxury liners or whatever, they can have big freezers full of meat or fresh fruits or vegetables. But if you're in a military ship, you need something that's easy to process, easy to store. And there's two things that would work perfectly that'll last forever, and that's um, spirulina powder and soy paste.
Hmm.
And you take those and you put them in a machine that makes them look like other things. Like you can make them look like pad thai with peanut sauce, or you can make them look like a chicken sandwich or a steak and potatoes, but it's all made out of soy and algae because those are easy. You can grow those anywhere. You can grow them in space if you need to. Um, you can grow them in like a chemical vats. And they provide enough sustenance for people to live, and the machines kind of make them just edible enough to get by.
Well, I mean, 3D printing applied to that as well, right? The same kind of
Yeah.
tech that I think people, one of the big, I don't know, my wife's vegetarian, so I end up eating a lot of vegetarian type
Mhm.
stuff. And, we've tried the Impossible Burgers. She actually doesn't like them because they're too much like meat. Um, which to me, they're
They
not
are
like meat.
not.
But I mean, if you grew up without eating a lot of, hamburger, I guess it might be okay for you. I mean, if anything, humans are adaptable, right? So give us
The
10
only
years.
the only veggie stuff that I can live with is I don't know if you've ever seen this. I think it's called North Star.
Oh yeah, yeah.
They make a veggie version of a barbecued rib.
Hmm.
It tastes sort of like a McDonald's McRib. And I can live with that. I'm not crazy about it, but it's got enough barbecue sauce on it that,
Can deal
you
with
know,
it. Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, she's the kind of vegetarian that actually she doesn't like a lot of processed stuff. Like she just wants to straight up eat vegetables, which is fine with me. But even that kind of brings up another thing, like, growing like real vegetables or real, meat certainly is a big piece of it. Um, and that's something that could be industrialized depending on, how we advance in those realms. But being able to grow fresh vegetables or something that's like a fresh vegetable, um, that those are all things I think people are hopefully going to figure out. But then it also creates vulnerability in the story. If you have a primary food production plan, didn't you, was it in Drop Trooper? I think there was a primary food production for the Tawny. Didn't they go after that at one point? Um,
I
there was
don't
like a production world.
I don't recall that.
Okay,
Um,
maybe I'm thinking of something different then.
but I have gone after food production in other series like Recon,
Uh,
first Recon book when he's trapped behind enemy lines. There's a food production plant and on the colony, and they destroy it and steal like a few truckloads of food,
mhm.
and starvation becomes a weapon of war in a very, very dirty and nasty guerrilla war they're fighting.
Yeah.
Um, I think I might have done it in one other one, but I don't think I did it in Drop Trooper. I'm not sure.
Mhm.
It's been so long. It's been 5 years since I wrote the first book. I don't remember.
Why can't you remember everything?
But
One of the things I loved in the army too that I don't see portrayed a lot is movement. Um, getting equipment on rail, getting equipment like we did rail load, we did ship load, we did air load. Uh, it's just it's pretty cool to put like a big piece of equipment on, a C5 Galaxy and cross and then roll it off again. I mean, we put Patriot launchers on ships. I mean, that was insane when I think back to it, like going around some spiral to get into the hold on the ship. Um,
Hmm.
and then we drove half across Israel with, in convoy. And that's not a thing you see portrayed that, quite often, except maybe outside of World War II, novels and things like that. Because um, it wasn't done that much until global war on terrorism came around.
Yeah, I was
And
gonna say there's a lot of that went on in Iraq. I mean,
yeah.
the Jessica Lynch, I think is the name of. Am I
Yeah,
getting?
well, just have I told you, like, I have a pretty direct connection to that. Like, Master Sergeant Bob Dowdy, who was in my battalion's maintenance unit, was her first sergeant and driver when she died, and I knew him. Um, I was behind this year for Memorial Day, but I try to post his bio every year for Memorial Day. But yeah, they were basically a maintenance company that was in convoy, and the captain got lost because he was using a PowerPoint map, and they drove through the same village twice. And when
She
they went
didn't
back,
die, by the way. She's still alive.
no, he's dead.
Oh no, you said Jess. I thought you were saying
Oh,
Jessica
Jessica
Lange.
Lynch is alive. No, no, his
Yeah.
Bob Dowdy is dead. Yeah, he
Oh,
died
okay. I'm
in the
sorry. I
crash.
misunderstood what you're
No, it's
saying.
okay. He was driving the Humvee that she was in.
Oh, okay. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
he died like I don't know. They were getting shot at. They ran off the road, crashed. He died in the crash. Um, but but yeah, that's something that quite often is a it's a realistic portrayal of you need to get equipment and people from point A to point B, and that introduces a lot of vulnerability that, route security and uh, controlling the MSRs in Iraq and Afghanistan was, I mean, the book I'm working on right now, like a huge piece of it because it's based so much on Afghanistan, is about securing roads and trying to make that fun to read about because it just, it sucks to do that. Um, is has been a challenge, but that was a big piece of that. Like depending on, especially on Afghanistan, where you didn't necessarily have you had air assets, but not as much depending on the elevation. Roads are what you needed to get troops and equipment around, and trying to secure those roads was a big part of what we spent our time doing.
Yes,
So
but in the future, roads where we're going, we don't need
we don't
roads.
need no road.
That's
Well,
one thing that you know how I've said before that I shy away from like autonomous weapons in drones and stuff in my books because nobody wants to read about that. But one thing I do have is all the cargo supply is unmanned.
mhm.
All the like the ships that bring down resupply, they're all unmanned and pretty much considered disposable. So if they get blown up, it's like, well, send another one.
Well, and that makes sense. I mean, we're almost to the point with our technology now of being able to do that. So it's
Well, plus when you're fighting a war on a planet, um, there really are no fronts and there's no behind the lines. I mean, because you can drop anywhere and they can hit anywhere. So putting in non-combatants or not non-combatants, but like, people who aren't trained to be uh not their primary training isn't to be on the front lines as a combatant
mhm.
wouldn't make sense anywhere on the planet. If you put people down there, they have to be able to fight and be equipped to fight because they could get attacked at any time.
I mean, you could do something fun depending on, how long this war has been going on or how, I mean, civilian pilots have definitely been employed, if the military is trying to grab assets as fast as it can. But I think you're right. Like that's a place where drones make a lot of sense. And there's a lot of fun stuff you can do that in the story.
Yeah. And I haven't done it, but maybe I should is write a story that has to do with the enemy getting a hold of one of our supply drops and have something interesting happening with that. That kind of appeals to me because
Mhm.
it allows me to bring all that stuff that's in the background in the world building that you never really tell the people about into the foreground and have it be interesting.
Well, there's a reason it's a mechanic in so many video games because it's like a loot chest, right? Like you go,
Yeah.
you get to the drop point, you kill everybody, and then, ooh, what's going to be inside it that I can, and for a story that can be like start a whole new part of the story.
Yeah.
Oh, it's got what was it? River from Serenity has been packed away in this drop.
There you go. Which does bring up a question though about the choice of weapons in military science fiction and to what extent that the choice of weapons that you take on a like an interstellar expedition is going to be influenced by how easy it is to make ammunition for it.
hmm
Because I've always been of the opinion that directed energy weapons would not be used for infantry because they're a nightmare tactically because it's like shining off a spotlight and saying, "Here I am," because
Hmm.
I have this big thermal signature. But on the other hand, if the choices are between that and having a kind of a weapon that you have to constantly manufacture ammo and get raw materials to manufacture it, what's going to be the trade-off there?
Yeah, and that's all fun stuff to play with, depending on the level of technology that you've got available. I mean, I guess that's the thing. We've talked about this. We have to come up with some constraints. You might have FTL or the ability to cross the galaxy, but you've got other constraints when you get to the location. Um, I'm just thinking about like, why not just send your replicators at the enemy and have them eat eat whatever, or maybe not the replicator, but the processor, right? Like you just send them all at the enemy fortifications to eat them and turn them into
Well,
ammunition.
the enemy might have anti.
You might have something to say about that.
I mean, there have been stories that I've read that have like the gray goo nanite clouds that
Mhm.
break down everything, but then the enemy has their own gray goo clouds that break down your gray goo clouds, and in the end, it was just like a throwaway thing that makes the story a little more complicated, but doesn't really add anything to the tension.
Right, right.
Which is why I kind of avoid the whole gray goo cloud. I've always felt that having a nanotechnology that can exist outside of some kind of a liquid medium to sustain it adds too drastic of a level of like a black swan event type thing to your technology that it makes it hard to concentrate on the character and the stories of the people. So I try to avoid that if at all possible, except maybe like in some doomsday weapon thing that they might encounter somewhere. But I don't want external nanotechnology to be a thing because it just it makes people not human anymore in a way because you can change everything about yourself. If you have nanites that can live out in the open air, they could just like change everything about the external shape of your body. I think John Ringo did a series like that
Hmm.
where some people chose to look like dragons and fly around. And that's a cool idea, but it's hard to make relatable characters if you can turn into a dragon.
Kind of terrifying. I mean, the campus where I work has a nano lab, and you even going, I've been in there, and like, I don't like the idea of being around things that penetrate the blood-brain barrier, and you don't know. Like, I don't think I've come into contact with any of it, but I haven't been tested. So,
The most nanotechnology I put in my books is people have like what they call a nanite medical suite that gets
mhm.
injected into their body when they're born. The people in rich colonies in the core worlds, and it lives, inside your bloodstream. It takes its nutrients from there, and it just breaks down any cancers or diseases it finds, and promotes healing, just so people live a long time because
Right.
they don't get um, what do you call the kind of disease that a chronic disease?
Mhm. Well, that seems pretty probable, actually. Where that's being
Yeah.
worked on now as well. So, trying to think
And
what.
that's another thing, medical care for the military. It's another logistical thing that depending on what your technology is, do you have do you have like labs that you bring along that can regrow limbs and organs and reimplant them in people? You know, is that something that you'd have to take somebody all the way back to Earth or your home world for? Is it something you can put in a spaceship and have them?
And are people, I've always wondered, like when you have tech like that, are people going to be just way more Leroy Jenkins, and willing to run at the gun nest, or do they realize they have more to lose, and so they're way more cautious?
Yeah, that's something you got to consider is that
Right.
the most of history, the people who fight in wars have been young young men who have not yet realized their own mortality.
Hmm.
I mean, you have officers and NCOs that are older and more experienced and know they can really die, but the people who, rush forward out of the trenches in World War One are like 19 and 20-year olds. Um, a lot of them 19 and 20-year-old virgins who had never been away from their hometown, and never seen the world and have no concept of death, what they're running into. So if you have people who, if you have a culture where people are going to live longer and they know it, and they know they're going to live to be 200 or 300 years old and not have it, and not have, and they have a lot to lose, and it's not like they're leaving a life of poverty where their prospects in life are really dim, even if they don't die in a war. They're leaving a life where they could live a long time and have a really comfortable life, and it may be hard to recruit people to volunteer to do that.
I know. Well, you got to come up with incentives. If people are feeling, bored or malaise because they feel that life doesn't have meaning, or you're right, like information could be considered logistics in a way, access to information. I think about the North Koreans in Ukraine that the Russians have been using, and as soon as they get access to a cell phone, their world gets blown open. But even when the first time I deployed, we were able to video conf. Well, no, first it was phones. Then like being able to video conference, you had to drive to a location like halfway across the country, um, to be able to video conference back with your family. And then by the time I left, like basically you were just on a laptop being able to use, at the time it was Skype, but that capability changed so much about your willingness to be there for long periods of time. It really changed everything about, I won't say it changed everything. I mean, you're still physically away from your family, which is terrible, but being able to talk to your family, like there also not being constraints on that. Like it used to be, you can only do it once a week, and we had to come up with a priority list, and we got to figure that out with, what the rotation is and things like that, so that you can go do this. And it always surprised me when some guys were like, "Nah, I don't want to do it," but um, but those are all things that have to be figured out, And if you're, that could be a huge quality of life for the people in your story. And if we're talking about intergalactic travel, or depending what the communication means is, those are all things that have a big part of it. And if you don't have the logistics to support that, or you can have a build up to it, I think that's all, interesting stuff to be part of that story that makes it a lot more
It,
realistic.
it also affects how you run your war too. If you have instantaneous communications,
Right.
then you're talking about a GWAT style war over interstellar distances, because you're
Mhm.
going to have micromanagement from the top down, people looking over your shoulder, and you're going to have like little camera feeds from all the troops that are going all the way back to Earth.
Yeah.
But if you have if you the only way to get a message back to Earth is to put it on a ship and send it back, then you're going to be talking about people like, in the turn of the 19th to 20th century style militaries, where you write a letter and it gets there weeks later, and then you get your reply months after that.
I know, but I
And
think that has a huge impact on leadership as well. Like if
yeah,
you could have great leaders that want to do their job, but when they're hamstrung by micromanagement or politicians that have a different set of incentives than the people on the ground, that can have a huge impact on what you're trying to accomplish. As opposed to, okay, I'm a leader in the moment. I have the freedom to make decisions, but I also don't have all the information because I don't have the ability to, have these greater sensor nets or communication methods, and things like that. So it's a catch 22, and I can't say that having Donald Rumsfeld looking over the shoulder of people in, in Iraq really helped a whole lot. Um,
well, even prior to that, in Vietnam, which did not have as much communication as we did on Iraq, you still had what's his name,
McNamara.
McNamara, you know, making choices for people on the ground that didn't make any sense
Mhm.
to people who are actually there. Uh,
Well, and Afghanistan's a good example of that too, because towards the end of the war, as we moved away from troops on the ground to drones and drone strikes, that was a huge, I mean, there had already been like, big declines in how much the Afghanis liked us, but
huh.
that was basically when it fell off a cliff because we had very little investment in the actual people of Afghanistan at that point. Like they were just watching drones fly around the sky, and there was very little way we were going to make, inroads.
I guess that's the whole argument is whether we should have been trying to invest in the people of
Right.
Afghanistan
Well,
to
yeah, I
help.
mean yeah, and that you come back to the seed of that whole thing, right? But
I mean, it's that I think is the problem a lot of people have with Afghanistan and Iraq is the whole nation building thing, you know.
right,
So if everybody knew we had to go into Afghanistan after 9/11, that was going to happen no matter what. But if we had, I think we tried too hard to be the good guys. And that meant that no matter how much progress we made finding the people who were behind 9/11, that we were never going to have a successful war there because we put it on ourselves that we're going to make Afghanistan into a modern country.
right.
Well, that only happened for a very brief period in like the 1960s and 70s, and never before and never
And
since.
only in Kabul.
Yeah, and only in Kabul then. So it's like you, what you intend to do in a war is is just as important as how you fight it. I mean, I can't I can't imagine how how we could have said anything different, whether we did it or not, how we could have said anything like, oh, we're just going to Afghanistan to blow everything up and then we're going to pull out and leave all the people in poverty and suffering. But that might have been what we should have done is not tried to rebuild Afghanistan in our own image because the Russians couldn't do it, you know.
I mean, I saw
Alexander the
studies
Great couldn't do it.
could have just dropped cash on Iraq, and it still would have been cheaper than what
Yeah.
we did. It might have had a better outcome.
Yeah. I mean, as far as Afghanistan, though, I mean, all the way back to Alexander the Great through the
Mhm.
British Empire, the Russians, Soviets, and us, that's nobody been able to rebuild that place into their own image before, and we weren't going to either.
No, and I mean, I want to say the enemy gets a vote, but like the people of Afghanistan weren't necessarily the enemy, but then they're getting siphoned off by the Taliban because these are all of these interplays
Well,
of
they don't want to live like us.
right. They don't. You're exactly right.
They don't want to
Yeah.
be westernized.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we shouldn't have tried to make them westernized. And although it like I said, I don't know how we could have said, "Oh, we're not going to give you dams and schools and stuff." But we shouldn't have. That's not why we're there. And I think if you're talking about a future war where you're out, you know, 30, 40, 100 light years from Earth fighting an enemy on another planet and you don't have instantaneous communications, uh, that's going to be up to the commander on the scene what the foreign policy of Earth is going to be towards
Right.
this planet.
And you got to have some pretty clear objectives to make that work. So
Of course, if you don't have communications, then you don't have to worry about looking bad in the media.
this is true. I mean, depending on when the story gets back eventually and how it
Yeah.
gets, twisted in the time being. But yeah, what is the other logistical piece I was thinking about? We've got communications, so here's one that everybody always forgets, but like human needs, like where are you going to take a crap? What do the bathrooms look like?
Huh.
Um, you know, no,
And I
that's
have
not,
to admit, I'd never dealt with that. I only even mentioned field latrines once in all of Drop Trooper, I think.
I know, like it's not fun to read about. Nobody wants their like, but that obviously it is a very important aspect of fieldcraft. And if you don't, I guess we should call it sanitation. Maybe that's a better way of
Sanitation,
doing
yeah.
it. Yeah. Yeah. And not that anybody needs to, I think you could have some pretty funny stories around that. Like any soldier in the middle of the night on guard duty that needs to take a crap, like there's always kind of funny stories that can be told with that.
Oh, yeah.
I can't think of any off the top of my head.
Another thing to consider, and if you have, we were talking about the whole nanite medical thing and how most of the reason for field sanitation is to avoid disease outbreaks.
Yeah.
If you everybody in the military as a nanite medical suite that keeps them from getting sick, do you need to do as much sanitation?
Maybe
I
just
mean,
for
maybe
cleanliness.
you, yeah, maybe you want to because it'd be really gross to have your crapper, next to your kitchen and
Mhm.
have flies all around. But, if you can drink dirty water without getting sick because you got little tiny machines in your body that cleanse it for you, you know, maybe
I mean,
you don't, maybe you don't ship in all that water purification stuff.
well, the still suits in Dune, like I can get, recycling urine, but how's it working for the crap? Like that never really like those people are all just walking around being feeling very uncomfortable.
It's funny. There's something that I had in the it was always in the background for the characters in Glory Boy,
hmm
but I never really talked about it. I tried putting it in once, and I'm like, no. Is that they're all the systems they have in their bodies, the enhancements, the that make them superhuman. Uh, it breaks down and uses every bit of energy that they have, which includes, waste materials.
hmm
So theoretically, they don't ever have to go to the bathroom.
Right. Well, if you get like, what is the point of our intestines? So, really, if you had some bio enhancement that was a third stage of the intestine, um, that seems possible. Like, if there's room in your body for it, I
It's
don't
just
know.
like it's those nanites. They
Right.
live in they break everything down before it gets that far and turn it into energy
You
to
just
run
you
themselves.
breathe it out as a minty dust when it's all done.
Exactly. But that would be very weird though. Can you imagine living that way, never actually having to go to the restroom?
There are certainly animals that, live that way. So are they
Are there?
fish?
Fish go to the bathroom. I've seen them.
Well, there are certain fish I think that don't though. But I can't think off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure there are animals that don't secrete waste the same way, like either through their skin
Yeah, yeah.
or they save it all up and, once a month or something they is when they let it all go. Um, maybe that's more, you get like this super hard pellet you got to pass out or something. But but
That's not something you write about
I
because
know
nobody wants to hear
exactly like
about it. But it is something, that I've thought about. Like, what would it be like to live that way?
hmm
Because you wouldn't need like, let's say you had this procedure for all of your soldiers.
hmm
You don't need latrines anymore, do
No,
you?
no.
You don't need bathrooms on your ships.
Where are you going to get privacy as a soldier if you can't go in the porta john, man? I mean, that's
I know.
like there's all kinds of follow-on effects from that.
Yeah, true. Where are they going to write their graffiti?
Exactly.
I think that would do more than anything else to change the fundamental nature of humanity.
hmm
Because I just can't imagine living that way.
We, yeah, I mean, our guts, as soon as something bad happens with your stomach, like your ability to fight or really do anything, is greatly diminished. And that's been a big part of, being in war for so long that would something else come up, like would a splinter be worse at that point if people are going to be relative to what pain is? I don't
I
know.
would think that the major problem then would be psychological.
Yeah.
That's something that you also don't see a lot of in military science fiction that I think you should is the psychological care of the soldier. I mean, let's say this is an interstellar war, and let's postulate that you don't have like travel that'll allow you to bring in people back and forth to like in the war on terror where people could just take a flight to the US and spend a
Right.
few days at home and then come back. Let's say it's months or even years before you can go home. So you have people who have been at war for years, like a World War II situation,
hmm
where they don't get to go home and the only rest and recreation they get is there, like back on the ship. There'd be a lot of stress, and you would have to come up with you'd have to have like a much bigger part of the military medical branch that would deal with psychological problems in that kind of case. People would have to be permanently assigned to units to deal
We
with
know,
stress.
I mean, I guess I haven't really had a chance to talk about it in the podcast much, but my first MOS was psychiatric specialist.
Yeah,
So I
you
went,
mentioned that. Yeah.
yeah, and the Army did away with that. Like there was a division level, like I would basically be at the aid station when, my that role where a soldier gets pulled off the line for whatever reason, battlefield, combat fatigue, whatever, they have a schizophrenic break. And then but there was another role that would be actually out like almost like a chaplain's aide, but like out in the units talking to soldiers and being there to almost lead like group counseling and things like that. But the Army eliminated those positions and like I want to say it was like 98 or 99, right before GWAT, happened, but nobody knew 9/11 was going to happen. And that role basically fell on chaplains. And I don't know that they've replaced it at this point. But one of the things they talked about in that school was, at least based on information from Vietnam, and I don't know if they have probably new studies at this point, but you're much more likely to develop PTSD if you're completely pulled out of the combat scenario. The idea was that you'd pull them away, give them a chance to rest, and then send them back because people are more damaged by feeling that like they have abandoned their unit if they can still fight than if you pull them out altogether. And that for me was one of the most surreal things about Iraq and Afghanistan was like you could be on a plane in Germany and 6 hours later be in a war, you know,
Yeah.
and going back and forth like it's surreal, and you talk to guys that just like it was very difficult to like make that shift from being freaked out all the time to then now you're just supposedly supposed to be feel like you're okay, back in Ramstein or where we were in like Heidelberg and whatnot. But you're right. I think I mean, you touch on it a bit in Drop Trooper.
Yeah. He
And
has to go see a shrink at one point.
right. But you also did it in a way that I felt it wasn't preachy or making it seem like it was a part of his combat effectiveness that needed to be addressed.
Mhm.
And I wish that is the way that it would be looked at more. Like it's still not fixed. Like people still don't want to go talk to counselors, and I talk to guys in right now that there's still a stigma to going to talk to any kind of
The only
psychologist.
way to break the stigma is to make it mandatory.
Hmm.
To say if you're in combat, then you have counseling for a couple hours or whatever. It's
Yeah,
just and that happens to everybody. You got to do it, and it's not like you're gonna see something on your record that says he went to a counselor because everybody would.
right.
That's the only way to make it no stigma is make it everybody does it.
Hmm. No, I agree.
And I think, well, the problem is right now I'm not sure that we have uh, adequate. Uh, I don't know how to put it, like an adequate idea of what to do with people who do have combat stress. Like a plan, I guess.
Yeah,
They give them drugs, and the drugs often cause problems of their own. And if they are self-medicating and you give them the drugs, then I knew somebody who took those drugs along with lots of alcohol and wound up having a heart attack and dying.
right.
You know,
Well, I
so
mean, alcohol is the main thing, at least in the Army for me. That was like the main thing you learned to use to medicate with.
yeah. Um, so I don't know that right now we have a adequate way of dealing with combat stress, but hopefully at some point we will.
Right.
Um, I know that we've always had combat stress, but I feel like certain wars cause more of it. And I think a lot of that is caused by the view society has of the war that you're fighting in and how well they accept people that come back.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, and also, I think um, how nightmarish the war is compared to regular life. I mean, look, some of the most horrific cases of combat stress came from World War One because it was a literal, it was a literal like
hellscape.
science fiction dystopian hellscape. If you read anything about what Europe was like in World War One, it was a nightmare. It was like it was a horror movie that you
When they
lived
were
every day.
we were basically living in a science fiction universe because new technology was rolling out constantly. These are people that grew up. I mean, they took horses to the battlefield, and then, you've got horses fight along tanks with, brand new automatic weapons and gas, and, you know, they're just throwing everything they can to see what works. And it'd be like, I try to imagine the mindset of somebody like they were living in a science fictional kind of mindset. Like you never really knew what to expect from anything, I would imagine. Um, but then even, World War II and I mean, my first thought is stories from out of the Pacific, but I also feel like a lot of the men growing up in that time, well, I mean, everybody that was part of the war, but you were kind of acculturated not to express it. And I don't know that they had more support, but it also didn't, I guess they came back and they did what they had to do and they were treated, I won't say well, but they were seen as people that did a necessary job.
Hmm.
And I feel my personal feeling out of like global war on terror is like nobody knows what to do with it. They don't, it's like we're talking about Iraq and Afghanistan. Like people now don't feel good about what the US did there. And that makes it hard to feel good about the job you did. And so it's just hard to reconcile that stuff, and there aren't many resources to help you with that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know that the way things unfolded in Afghanistan, it kind of alienated a lot of people I knew who were proud of what they'd done.
Yeah,
And all of a sudden it's like, oh, it was all for nothing because of what we wound up doing.
right.
Um, Honestly, what happened in Iraq, the reasons for us being there weren't as good, but I feel like the outcome was a lot better in Iraq than it was in Afghanistan.
I think we still have to see, but
Yeah.
slightly, hopefully,
I
you hate
mean,
to be
Iraq still has a functioning civilization.
yes, yeah, yeah. So,
Um, but yeah, and that's another thing to deal with in military science fiction books that a lot of people don't think of is what do the people back home think about the war you just fought or the war you're fighting?
mhm.
Are they even aware there's a war going on? Because that's something I dealt with in a bunch of my books that were about the war with the Tawnee was most people back on Earth didn't have any clue what was happening or their lives were no different because there was a war going on,
Right.
20, 30 light years away.
Which increasingly, like the more humans you get and the more worlds you get, and that seems more and more likely, and
Hmm.
even in a future where you have instantaneous communication, like that also means you'll have trillions of options of things to watch. So if you
Yeah.
don't want to watch the War Channel, you don't have to.
And in a world with instantaneous communications, maybe you have even more um, propaganda.
Right.
And you know how it is right now, where nobody knows what's really happening or what the truth really is because there's so many different sources of information, and you don't know what's real.
Hmm.
Is that going to be better or worse in that kind of situation?
Which, could be one last logistical aspect that I hadn't thought of, but increasingly becomes important is compute and data. How much compute do you have? What's your ability to analyze, data on the battlefield, AI being used in applications in the battlefield right now? What happens if you take out someone's compute? By compute, I mean like, basically the computer's running your ability to analyze data. That increasingly
Mhm.
becomes a big deal. And that's something that you may have to think about and how to either move that or connect to it or, make it effective. I don't know, man. Some of this new stuff that YouTube's rolling out, like they're basically just replicating some of the most garbage videos on YouTube, but it's kind of scary how it's still not close. You can see it, but like with everything, it's, in 5 years, it's going to be scary. So,
You've you've heard about the YouTube cracking down on the fake movie trailers, right?
yeah, yeah.
And a lot of that, a lot of that's AI
Hmm.
and just computer simulations, and that's it's not great now. I mean, you got movie trailers where basically they look like real people, but all they do is they turn and look into the distance, and don't say anything. But what about in 20 years, 30 years? Are you gonna have simulations so perfect that nobody can tell what's real and what's not?
I mean, and to me, those trailers are a perfect example of you seeing what you want to see in something. Like the only reason you click on it is because, oh, I would love to see a movie about that. And then you
Yeah,
click on it and you watch like 30 seconds, and then you start to realize, like, oh, this isn't actually real, but I really wanted it to be real. You know,
yeah,
there was actually one for Voltron that was fake. And then it turns out Henry Cavill is making a Voltron movie, maybe, or they just finished
yeah. It's a
filming.
Voltron. It's on Netflix, I think.
Okay. To me, that's like the perfect example of like it's very difficult. Um, and to plug, like if you're going to be in LibertyCon coming up in June, Rick is on a panel talking about Ukraine actually, so and the war in Ukraine. So
I'm totally unqualified to be on that panel. I don't know why I'm on it, but there I am.
yeah, but I mean that'll be a great opportunity to talk about the information war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
I think
there's panels about world building and a bunch of other stuff that I'm an expert at. I'm
mm,
not on those, but I'm at one on the war in Ukraine for some reason.
yeah, I'm on a Chris Kennedy panel. I was like, do I have a contract I don't know about? Maybe. We'll see. Um, I guess since we're a little bit in advance, if you're at LibertyCon, stop and say hi. Um, we would love to learn how the panels are organized so we can have a little more control of our fate next year. Um, all right, well, what have we missed? I'm trying to think of like future legit. It feels like one of the things about the future is we don't quite know the logistics that will be necessary. And anybody that has something cool they can think up, I always love to read that, something I hadn't thought of or some new piece of
Just remember, future events such as these could affect you in the future.
it.
Sorry, that's from Plan 9 from outer space.
Yep.
But yeah, no, I think logistics is fascinating world building. It's not something you're going to put in your stories a lot, but it's something you need to have in the back of your mind because it can affect plot points. Like,
Exactly.
is there a shipment that can get hijacked or a shipment that can get, intercepted that will make things really tough on people? Or, you know, is logistics an afterthought that as long as you have one industrial fabricator left, you can build more, and.
Which, just like you said with drones, can sometimes maybe make things not as interesting. But I mean, it's all about constraints, right? Which we talked about before. So if your fabricators need material to run and you can't get the material, that's a problem. And if your trigger pullers don't have bullets, that's a problem. So
Yeah.
how do you get
I
around
mean, that's to me, that's an argument for um, guns that run on very simple principles. I mean, we think of, you know, gunpowder bullet weapons like we use now as simple and something and I've heard people say, oh, we'll keep using those because they're simple, and they work. But what if you're 30 light years from home? Where are you going to make the gunpowder? I mean, is it more complicated to manufacture more gunpowder and load it into rounds, or is it more complicated to just bring along a lot of rechargeable power packs and then you can make um, little Gauss rifle darts
right?
out of just metal, you know?
Magnetize a coil and shoot something down the.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, as energy becomes more prolific, and I mean, just think about the move from to USB-C. Now we have pretty much a ubiquitous connection point between, power as limited as it is, and a device. One of my favorite things, like gadgets I bought recently, is a plasma candle lighter with a USB-C input. I can plug it into a solar panel, charge it up, and start a fire out in the woods. I don't need matches. And to me, that's like I'm sure the thing would fail eventually, but that's pretty amazing, you know?
There was a YouTube video I saw recently of a guy who built a it's more of a toy than anything real, but it's a plasma cannon. It's like
Uh,
a plasma gun that you can shoot like balls of fire out of.
so this is logistical. I lost a chicken this weekend to a raccoon, which hadn't happened in a while. And so I got on between Gemini and ChatGPT. I asked Gemini if I could I wanted to make a camera directed, like using the analytics on a PTZ to direct a green laser, like a 5 watt, to shoot raccoons in my backyard, which I don't think would be hugely difficult. Like I need a gimbal for the laser and I need something to control that directed by the camera. Gemini wouldn't do it. Like it was like, no, I'm only designed to do things that are, helpful. And so I get on ChatGPT and Grok, and both of them are like, that sounds like a fun project. So, so I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to build a laser to shoot raccoons. But
You can build a little Gauss gun to shoot raccoons.
maybe, we haven't said the word resources, but that's really what it comes down to is like, what resource do you need to solve your problem, and how are you going to get there, or who's going to help you get it? So,
Yeah.
yep.
And also you're talking about compute. We these large language models that we have right now, you know, that far in the future, are you going to have a core of engineers, or are you going
Exactly.
to have a AI system that tells you how to build things or builds them itself?
Hmm.
So,
Rapidly iterates it for you so that you figure it out. Yeah.
so in the future, it's very possible that your invasion force is going to consist of trigger pullers and healthcare professionals, maybe even just mental healthcare professionals. And that's it.
That's it.
Everything else will be automated.
All connected by AI, hopefully it doesn't screw it up.
I mean, I hope they don't make the mental health care professionals AI,
Hmm.
because that could be bad. But although I do it in my um Star Bounty, I think it is, books. They're in one of the prisons where the main character gets put into prison at one point. They do have AI uh psychological counselors
Hmm.
because it's less dangerous than having like people come in there.
Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite books, Gateway by Frederick Pohl, is basically all about a guy talking to his AI therapist. But
Yeah.
yep.
It'd be
Right.
funny if the only humans in Interstellar War are the actual trigger pullers because we don't trust robots to do that, but they do everything else.
Which is very possible. I mean, I would say if we weren't already doing it in places, at least where they're using AI for targeting, and then it's already happened where they just let the fire solution happen without human intervention. Um, but that is definitely could be a thing where humans have to approve every kinetic action. Right. All right. Well, we are at an hour. Thank you for hanging out with us. And if there's anything we have not thought about, I'd love to hear about it in the comments or come over to the Discord and let us know because I feel like most of our conversations, we get to the end and I feel like there's a lot that we could have thought of in the midst of the conversation. So
Oh, we could talk about this kind of crap for hours and
I
not
know.
get
Well, this is just kind of fun. So, what are the future resources that need to be supplied, and how are they going to do it? And what if you have more AI? If you cut AI out of the pipeline? What does the pipeline look like? I don't know. I actually love talking to logistics geeks because there's so much of it that you never realize that is super interesting. Um, but anyway, thanks for hanging out with us, and we will see you next time. And if you're going to come to LibertyCon, check us out there. So both Rick and I will be hanging out around the conference. So, all right, we'll see you later.